many of you have been asking me questions about this topic. It's a topic that students of mine are very much intrigued by. And so what I thought we would do here in this special segment is that I would outline my top 6 movies chronicling the civil rights movement. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Number 6, 2013's The Butler. Now, even though this movie is a composite of real-life individuals, facts, and stories, one reason why I really enjoy this film is because it shows the evolution of the civil rights movement going from the 1950s and spanning up through the 1980s. I've discussed this movie in the classroom. I've shown portions of it in the classroom, and it's something that students just really enjoy because it expresses to them this idea of a narrative timeline. It shows how history changes, it shows how people change, and it shows how society changes amidst all of these social pressures and cultural movements that were ongoing during those volatile times. There are also some really great supporting performances that can be found in this role. Not only do Forrest Whitaker and Oprah Winfrey give really all-star acts in this film, but it's really just interesting to see a lot of the cinematic depictions of the presidents that the main characters interact with throughout the film. Number 5, Judas and the Black Messiah. This film came out in 2021, and it came out at the height of the pandemic, and as a result, I don't think that it got a lot of the awareness and attention that it perhaps should have. This movie chronicles the Black Panther movement in that very divisive year of 1968, and specifically it looks at the exploits of Black Party leader Fred Hampton, who sought to create what ultimately became known as the Rainbow Coalition. And that was this disparate conglomeration of people in the Black Party movement, the Black Panther Party movement, and a host of other individuals from other organizations as well. And why I think this one is so revealing is that it shows how the civil rights movement fractured by the time we get to the late 1960s, that there was a sizable portion of activists who were in the movement who thought that what they considered to be the rather tame methods of Dr. King were no longer working. This also offers us a very somewhat grim and somber depiction of the FBI as well, who is depicted in the film as using some unsavory methods, as is endorsed by the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, who is magnificently portrayed by Martin Sheen in this movie. This is a film that dives into complexity, it dives into controversy, but it's an important film for us to think about in modern cinema. Number 4. This one is actually a tie for 2 movies that came out in the same year, and that is Loving and Hidden Figures. And the reason why I matched these 2 together is because thematically they have some similarities, and they reveal to us that sometimes the most iconic people of the civil rights movement did not anticipate or aspire to starting a movement. They were people who simply wanted to go about their everyday lives and their everyday jobs. And whether it was an interracial couple living in Virginia or African-American female mathematicians working at NASA in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, they did not aspire to be heroes. They simply wanted to go about their everyday lives. But sometimes history is created by those everyday people. And it's important that we take stories like that into consideration as well. Number 3, Boycott. This is an HBO film from 2001 that hardly anybody has heard of. But it's really one of the finer representations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his wife Coretta, and their iconic move that many people consider initiated the modern civil rights movement, and that is the Montgomery bus boycott. In this film, Jeffrey Wright does a magnificent job playing Dr. King. And one thing that I really enjoy about this film is that it's it's somewhat tame, but it's very digestible. It's rated PG. It is perfect for students of middle age, perhaps 5th grade. It's something that works really, really well when working with younger audiences. If you're an educator working in the classroom, I definitely encourage you to check out the 2001 film Boycott. Very much so a hidden gem. Number 2, Malcolm X. This is Spike Lee's masterpiece starring Denzel Washington, an Academy Award-nominated performance, and rightfully so. And much like Judas and the Black Messiah, the one reason why I really enjoy this film is that it shows the complexity of the civil rights movement. And if The Butler shows us how the movement itself evolved over time, this film shows us how an individual leader within the civil rights movement can change over time. This shows us a man who is very militant to start off with, and then he goes through a personal revolution in and of himself as he goes along this rather interesting spiritual journey. And, you know, what else can we say about Denzel Washington in this role? He's just absolutely fantastic, and he captures the fire, the passion, sometimes the bitterness of this iconic civil rights leader. And it is just a phenomenal film with a very potent message, especially in some of its final scenes. Number 1, 2014's Selma by director Ava DuVernay. I saw this in theaters when it came out, and I was absolutely blown away by every aspect of this film. Not only does it largely stay true to historical facts, but the cinematography, the material culture, the performances, the fusion of period music with modern music, the depictions, the incredibly emotional depictions as to how some civil rights advocates involved in this movement in Selma in 1965, how they meet their tragic ends, these very, very emotional moments. And amidst it all, with Martin Luther King Jr. being depicted as the hero in the film, we nonetheless see him in a state of vulnerability as some of his personal foibles and shortcomings come out into conversation among the characters. And it just goes to show that even our greatest heroes in American history have their shortcomings. Nobody is perfect. This is true of all the historical figures that we respect. And despite all of that, it is still a glowing interpretation of Dr. King and all that he stood for. And for that reason and more, Selma is my number 1 pick. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Real History as we've examined some of the classic examples and some of the great interpretations of the civil rights movement in cinema. We'll see you next time.